I mentioned in a previous video that I was going to repaint the bilge up in the V-berth area and the bilges throughout the entire boat. Before I did that project though, I wanted to raise up this little area just before that lip so that the water could drain out of the bilge. It rained a few days ago, but it's been dry for probably 5 days, and the fact that water's still there concerns me a little bit, so I'm going to raise that area up a little bit. I pulled the cables that ran through that hole there and up through this area that ran up to the windlass on the bow. I pulled those through so they'd be out of the way. The first thing I'm going to do is sand down that area. Then I've got a heat gun here, and just in case I need to dry out that fiberglass a little bit, I'll make sure to put it on a low setting and keep it a few inches away from the surface. I've got a dust buster just in case I need to clean up some dust, some acetone and some paper towel for wiping down the area. I've got a Sharpie just in case I need to draw any areas out. I've got some gloves because I'm going to be working with some epoxy. There I've got the epoxy resin and the hardeners up on top there. I've got a couple plastic cups there to mix it in and some mixing sticks. I've got some measuring cups just to make sure I have the right amounts. I've got some chop strand matte fiberglass there and some scissors for cutting the strips I need. And of course I got some paint brushes to wet out the area. So this is actually going to be one of my larger projects, a little more involved than some of the demolition and smaller projects that I've been doing lately. I've also got a mask, some goggles, and some hearing protection for when I'm sanding. After doing just a little bit of sanding, it actually looks fairly dry down here. I'm going to continue doing a little sanding. I've got some 60 grit here, so I'll be just kind of scuffing up the area before I clean it up. I've got some acetone on some paper towel here. I'm going to start wiping down the area and try to get the whole area cleaned up. The fiberglass actually looks pretty dry just ahead of that lip there, so that makes me feel a whole lot better. I just didn't want water standing in this area when it can drain out to the hole behind it. I've gone over this area several times with acetone just to make sure it's perfectly clean down there. I'm sure it's pretty dry, but I do want to use the air gun on it, the heat gun on it, just for a few seconds, just to make sure that fiberglass is dried out. I'm not 100% sure how much fiberglass I'm going to need, so I'm just cutting lots of little pieces here and I'll build it up as I go. If I build it too high, I can always sand it down, or if I don't build it high enough, I can always come back and sand the surface and then start applying more fiberglass and epoxy on top. I think that may be enough there. I am working in a well-ventilated area now. Got all the hatches open. The can here said to mix 6 tablespoons of resin with 1/4 teaspoon of hardener, which I have here. Now I've got to mix it for a minute straight. Make sure it gets all mixed up there. Once it's all mixed, I've got about 8 to 12 minutes of working time. Alright, the first thing I'm going to do is wet out the area and a few inches beyond the area where I want the fiberglass to go. Now I can start putting my fiberglass down. As I put down each layer or piece, I'll just keep wetting it out. I've done a little fiberglass work before, but I can tell you I'm definitely not a professional at it. I'm sure as I keep working on Moxie, I'll get a lot better at it. As that fiberglass fabric absorbs the epoxy, you can see it turning clear as we go. I can see that epoxy is starting to get a little harder now, harder to work with. I set that cup of epoxy aside, and you can see the paintbrush is stuck in there, and if you feel it, it's actually pretty hot right now. That first batch of epoxy did harden up pretty quickly before I was finished with the fiberglass, so I mixed a really small batch and I just finished up here. I wanted to make sure to get a nice level surface right before that lip right there. I know it's not perfect and it doesn't look that great, but I'm going to let it harden up overnight, and then I'm going to come back tomorrow and sand it down a little bit. All I wanted to do was improve this area just a little bit before I came back and sanded and painted the bilge. I knew it wasn't going to turn out perfect, but I just wanted to make it better. Now I get to clean up my mess and go take a shower. Alright guys, I'm back on the boat. It's the next day after I did this fiberglass work yesterday. I've let everything cure and harden overnight. Looks pretty good for now. But it has not yet been a full 24 hours. I wanted to start sanding on it today, but I think I'm going to let it cure another night. My plan is to come back in the next day or so and sand that down to the form I want it to have. And then I'm going to end up sanding out the entire bilge. And my plan is to paint the bilge with this Total Bilge from Total Boat. I've read some pretty good reviews online, and it was a pretty good price. So I'll try it out in a future episode, and I'll let you guys know how it turns out. As always, thanks again for watching Sailing Moxie, and we'll see you in another episode.